July 16, 1945, 05:29 a.m. Trinity Proving Ground, Jornada del Muerto, New Mexico. The air tastes like iron and cold sand. Breath fogs in front of faces pressed against wind-browned canvas coats. Men in wool overcoats, army officers with brass, civilian scientists with cigarette-burned sleeves, huddle behind banks of instruments as if the machines themselves might ward off what is coming. A thin, sweet smell of engine oil and solder drifts from crates that have been opened and reclosed a dozen times. Wooden spools of cable lie like sleeping snakes at men's boots. Beyond the fenced perimeter, the desert is a frozen plain of sagebrush and low sky, almost indifferent to the human gravity pulling everyone into this one point. Lieutenant General Leslie R. Groves stands with his back to the sun, the silhouette of his officer's cap crisp against the horizon. Beside him is J. Robert Oppenheimer, hair untamed, cigarette between two fingers, eyes like someone observing an earlier, stranger universe. A row of military jeeps crouches nearby, their headlights off, headlights pooled with frost. Heavy canvas tents house oscilloscopes and radiometers. Cameras, some mounted on armored stands, some in sandbag pits, are aimed at the 100-foot steel tower that supports the most closely held secret on Earth, a device cased in a sphere of metal and hope. The tower itself is a geometry of steel and scaffolding. Sandbags and berms ring an expanse of ground that for months has been scrubbed and monitored, a ring road of patrols and silence. Men in coveralls, Los Alamos technicians whose coats still smell faintly of acetone and burnt coffee, move like ghosts between the measuring instruments. They wear goggles, gloves, and the tight, determined faces of men who have felt the pressure of a deadline, measured in calendar months and the lives of millions. Radios squawk in bursts, weather, instrumentation checks, countdown verifications. Each voice is clipped. Code words fall like talismans. The equipment is absurd in its variety and precision. Seismographs lie in shallow pits, their paper drums turning tiny scripts of the Earth's whispers. High-speed cameras are loaded with film wrapped in protective tins, film that will be slashed apart frame by frame later to make sense of a second no human has ever seen before. Oscilloscopes hum. Dosimeters glint in the sunlight. A barbered army chaplain approves last-minute confessions in a canvas hut. A man in the command trench, Captain Kenneth Bainbridge, scientist-turned-test director, checks his watch and scribbles something that looks for all the world like prayer. He is precise and brittle with it, every movement governed by a checklist that reads like doctrine. You feel the scale more than you see it. The secrecy has been its own architecture. Whole towns created with numbered houses and post offices that do not exist on any civilian map. Workers who arrived with false names and left with souvenir spoons to a life they could not tell their wives about. Oak Ridge, Hanford, Los Alamos. These names are whispered as if myth. Los Alamos is no longer a mere laboratory. It is a village of concrete and barbed wire, of children who grew up under blackout curtains and nurses who sign non-disclosure forms like wedding vows. Men like Groves have turned logistics into a weapon. Rail cars threaded like veins through states. Prefabricated houses trucked and raised in secrecy. Entire communities fed and supplied under the rubric of urgent wartime work. The scale hums in the bones of every man standing in the sand. At the fringe of the crowd, a young corporal keeps a hand ready on a clipboard, sweating despite the cold. He has been ordered not to read the names in ink, only to deliver the paper when the time comes. Nearby, Enrico Fermi, his pockets full of thoughts and little experiments, stands with hands in his pockets, watching the horizon's silver change to pale gold. He tosses a pebble into the dry earth and notes with the detached curiosity of a man who has seen more than one mountain of consequence fall. The pebble kicks up dust, arcs, lands. He is the arrested physics of waiting. There is an almost obscene normalcy to some of the preparations. Cooks have laid out coffee that will never reach everyone. A lieutenant folds blankets that will be bundled into trucks if things go wrong. Men sharpen pencils as if sharpening fate. The countdown itself is not yet audible. Instead, there is a rhythm, instrument checks, weather calls, a whispered prayer in multiple languages. In the distance, the unassuming hamlet of Trinity is nothing more than an idea on maps. An array of guard posts, a wire fence, and the nearest building, a utilitarian house used for briefings, make up the entire town for now. And the one truth everyone keeps to themselves. Written into every measured variable is the scale of secrecy, how entire cities, Entire swathes of industry had been moved, masked, and remade into the Manhattan Project's private cosmos. Men who had specialized in the minute, a lens alignment, a capacitor tolerance, found themselves part of something vast and secretive, a logistical dream no peacetime mind would have designed. Trucks that looked like ordinary military supply had been altered and reinforced. Railcars that seemed to carry coal instead carried uranium slugs. Whole hills had become repositories for research no single university could host. They do not yet know what it will look like. There is only the tension of possibility, a tautness that runs from the tower out to the velvet of the desert and back to the faces of the men who will carry the story forward. Oppenheimer lights his cigarette, holds it to his mouth as if tasting a future already combusted, and mutters a line from the Bhagavad Gita under his breath. Around him, instruments tick and blink, and men measure themselves against a clock that will both reveal and conceal history. A gust of wind lifts loose sand and carries it across the instruments, as if the desert itself tests their resolve. Beyond the fences, the world keeps spinning. Telegraph lines hum, a distant train whistles. A child's laughter somewhere in an ordinary town continues unknowing. Here, at this exact longitude and latitude, men are assembling the unimaginable out of manifold small certainties. May 1945. Farm Hall, Godmanchester, Cambridgeshire, England. The war in Europe is over, and the once invincible Reich has fallen into silence. The roads of Germany are lined with the ruins of cities that once gleamed with parades and steel. But here, tucked behind ivy-choked walls in the English countryside, the British are keeping a secret of their own, a mansion-turned-gilded cage for some of the most brilliant minds of the defeated Axis. The house is called Farm Hall, but its residents know it for what it is, a prison with good manners. Inside, the floors creak with the slow footsteps of guards. The walls, thick and wood-paneled, hide microphones planted in every corner, every chandelier, every socket. The occupants, 10 of Germany's top nuclear scientists, do not know they are being recorded. Werner Heisenberg, the once revered father of quantum mechanics, sits in an armchair by the bay window, flipping through a worn notebook. He looks smaller than his legend, his posture slouched, his collar unbuttoned. Across from him, Otto Hahn, the chemist who first split the atom in 1938, sits with a pipe in his mouth, the smoke curling like a thought he cannot finish. Around them, men like Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, Kurt Diebner, and Erich Bagge wander the room like ghosts of a fallen empire. Outside, the English countryside hums with post-war quiet. Farmers in fields, children on bicycles, a red mail van rattling down the lane. Inside, the men debate equations and the future of physics as if the Reich were still standing. They have no idea that in less than 3 months, the Americans will reveal what they never believed possible. Heisenberg had once been confident, arrogantly so. During the war, he had told German officers that the atomic bomb could not be built in time to change the outcome. It would take too much uranium, too many resources, too much industrial coordination. Germany, besieged by bombers and shortages, could not afford such an enterprise. He reasoned that if it was too hard for Germany, it must be too hard for anyone. And so, the German nuclear program had remained small, scattered, a handful of laboratories, some cyclotrons, a few theoretical studies buried in bureaucratic indecision. In Berlin, Leipzig, and later in Heckingen, the scientists worked under candlelight and curfews, dreaming of what might be possible but never of what could be done. The SS wanted results, the Luftwaffe wanted weapons, and the scientists, brilliant, pragmatic, fearful, delivered reports, not bombs. Now as they drink tea from chipped porcelain under the watch of polite British guards, they trade speculations about what the Allies might have achieved. Hahn believes the Americans have focused on radar or rockets. Von Weizsäcker insists the enemy has no atomic weapon, that the science was too young, too fragile. Heisenberg laughs at the notion of a city-sized project. Impossible, he says to Hahn, almost pitying the idea. No one could gather that much uranium, that much labor, and keep it secret. Even the Americans are not magicians. Hahn nods in agreement, puffing thoughtfully on his pipe. They are good engineers, yes, but physics does not bend to politics. Outside, the trees whisper against the windows. None of them know the microphones are listening. None of them know that at that very moment, thousands of miles away, men in desert uniforms are preparing to prove them wrong. Later that evening, the dinner bell rings. The scientists gather around a long table under the dim light of a chandelier. Their conversation turns again to the war, to Hitler's arrogance, to Speer's factories, to the irony that they, who once lectured on the indeterminacy of the atom, could not foresee the end of the world as they knew it. Von Weizsäcker leans back, a faint smile on his lips. If anyone had built such a bomb, he says, the war would have ended differently. Heisenberg nods. Indeed, if the Americans had the bomb, they would have used it. The irony will soon detonate over their heads. Like a thunderclap across history, for now, they sip tea in ignorance, listening to the crackle of the hearth. Outside, the summer of 1945 warms the English hills, and a coded telegram is already being drafted in Washington, a message that will travel across the Atlantic to London, to the British command, and finally, to Farmhall. It will arrive on August 6th, and with it, the world will change. August 6, 1945. 7:45 p.m. Farmhall, England. The summer dusk settles slowly over the English countryside. Long shadows stretch across the garden, and the smell of rain drifts through the open windows. Inside, the German scientists are finishing dinner. Plates of boiled potatoes, a bit of roast beef, and weak tea. The wireless sits in the corner, a polished mahogany box with brass dials, humming faintly as the BBC Evening News begins. At first, the voices are indistinct, fading in and out through static. Then comes the headline, clipped, formal, unmistakable. This is London. At 7:15 this morning, American forces dropped a single bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The device, described as an atomic bomb, possesses destructive power equal to 20,000 tons of TNT. Silence. Chairs creak. Forks stop midair. Han blinks, his hand trembling slightly as the pipe falls from his fingers and lands on the tablecloth. Heisenberg stares at the wireless, his face pale and unreadable. For a long, suspended moment, no one speaks. Von Weizsäcker breaks the silence first. That must be propaganda, he mutters. A bomb of that power? No, it's impossible. But Heisenberg isn't so sure. His jaw tightens. His eyes narrow. The phrase atomic bomb lingers in the air like a scent no one can wash away. The broadcast continues. Details sketchy, but enough to confirm the unimaginable. Hiroshima, a city of soldiers and civilians, nearly erased. A weapon born from splitting the atom. Kurt Diebner, the military physicist who had once run Germany's own atomic project, exhales sharply. If it's true, he says, then they've done what we could not. Otto Hahn rises from his chair, pacing the room with his hands behind his back. He is the man who first discovered nuclear fission, the spark that lit the path to this moment. His voice cracks with disbelief. God in heaven, what have we started? The room fills with restless murmuring. Heisenberg remains still, eyes distant. His mind races through equations, neutron cross-sections, critical masses, uranium enrichment yields. He knows what it would take to build such a device. The numbers dance like ghosts in his memory. The tons of uranium ore, the miles of diffusion cascades, the unimaginable manpower. It cannot be true, Hahn insists again, softer this time. Not in so short a time. It took us 6 years merely to understand the theory. But Heisenberg finally speaks, voice low and certain. If they have built cities for this, entire secret cities, then it is possible. The others look at him. Cities? Diebner asks. Yes, Heisenberg says. Factories, reactors, enrichment plants, everything working in parallel. Thousands of engineers, not hundreds, perhaps tens of thousands. Entire regions producing only for this bomb. That is the scale it would require. Hahn sinks back into his chair. We never even had the materials. The Americans, how could they keep something like that hidden? Heisenberg's gaze hardens. Because they could afford to, and because they were willing to believe it could be done. He stands and crosses to the window. Outside, the evening air hums with crickets and the faint sound of a passing train. The peaceful English landscape mocks the revelation that has just fallen upon them. In that moment, a profound silence grips the room, not of disbelief but of realization. Each man begins to see piece by piece what they had missed. While they had argued over theory, the Americans had built an empire of secrecy. Massive enrichment plants in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, plutonium reactors at Hanford, Washington, the secret laboratory on the mesa at Los Alamos. Entire towns had been born, fenced, guarded, and erased from maps. Heisenberg murmurs, "They must have had a general, someone who commanded it all." "Groves," says Baga quietly. "The name was in intercepted reports." Leslie Groves. Heisenberg nods almost admiringly. "Then that man has changed history." The BBC continues to drone in the background. Official statements, estimates of destruction, words like unprecedented and apocalyptic. None of it quite reaches them. Then Han, face gray, whispers something that chills the room. "We are the fathers of it all, and yet it was the Americans who gave it life." Later that night, when the house is quiet and the guards have retired to the kitchen, Heisenberg lies awake in the darkness of his room. A single lamp burns by his bedside, illuminating the pages of his notebook. His pencil scratches furiously across the paper. A rough calculation of uranium critical mass, chain reaction timing, blast yield. When he finishes, he stares at the numbers for a long time. The math tells him the truth. The Americans have done it. Down the hall, Han cannot sleep. He sits at his window, head in his hands, whispering to no one. If only I had refused to publish that paper in '38. At 11:15 p.m., the microphones hidden in the chandelier record one last line. Heisenberg's voice quiet but clear. "They have built entire cities to do what we thought was impossible. And that is why they have won." August 7th, 1945, the morning after Hiroshima. Rain lashes against the wide windows of Farm Hall. The scientists eat in silence, the clink of cutlery the only sound in the dining room. Outside, the countryside smells of wet earth and lilacs, serene, deceptive. Inside, minds that once shaped the foundation of quantum theory are unraveling the immensity of what has just been revealed. The BBC updates continue through the morning. More details arrive from Washington. President Truman's statement confirming that the atomic bomb was produced by the Manhattan Engineer District under the command of General Leslie R. Groves. "It was," the announcer says, "the greatest scientific and industrial achievement in human history." Heisenberg leans forward, elbows on his knees, listening. His brow furrows at the mention of industrial. Han's eyes widen when the reporter adds, 3 great plants were built in complete secrecy. One at Oak Ridge, Tennessee for uranium enrichment, one at Hanford, Washington for plutonium production, and a laboratory at Los Alamos, New Mexico for weapon design and assembly. More than 100,000 workers were involved. 100,000? Han repeats softly. The number hangs in the air like thunder. Von Weizsäcker scoffs, but his voice trembles. "That cannot be right. 100,000 people? And not one leak? Not one word escaped?" Heisenberg shakes his head. "It can be done. If every worker sees only their task, one part of a machine whose purpose they do not know." He rises and walks toward the wireless, as if needing to stand closer to the proof of his failure. His voice is low, almost reverent. "They built cities of ignorance. That is the true genius of it. The physicists knew," the engineers guessed, "but the workers and they simply worked." The men exchange glances. It is as if the scale itself dwarfs their comprehension more than the physics ever did. In Germany, their atomic project had consisted of a few dozen researchers scattered across collapsing universities. In the US, Groves had conjured entire metropolises out of nothing. Heisenberg gestures absently as he speaks, lost in the vision forming in his mind. "Imagine it. Trains of uranium ore arriving under guard. Refineries larger than any in Europe. Miles of pipes! Miles! To separate isotopes by mass. And reactors that breed new elements. Elements that never existed in nature." Han mutters, "They've done it with money. Endless money." "No," says Heisenberg, turning sharply. "Not just money, will, coordination, belief." He moves to the window and watches the rain streaking down the glass. The Americans believed the impossible could be organized. That is their true discovery. For the first time, none of them speaks back. Even Diebner, the military man, sits silently, his fingers tapping the table in thought. After lunch, the guards escort them to the drawing room. The wireless plays again, interviews from Washington. Reporters speak of strange fenced towns where the residents had no idea what they were building. Women at sewing tables, machinists on 12-hour shifts, technicians who handled enriched uranium without knowing what it was for. One announcer describes Oak Ridge as a city without a name, hidden behind miles of barbed wire built in just 18 months. Han laughs, not with amusement, but disbelief. A city without a name, he repeats. We could barely get a shipment of graphite without 10 committees asking questions. Von Weizsäcker folds his arms. We were doomed by arrogance, he says bitterly. We thought only we could do it. We dismissed the possibility that anyone else might succeed. And they did. That evening, as the lamps flicker and the rain stops, Heisenberg sketches diagrams in his notebook. Flowcharts of reactors, isotope cascades, and vast factory networks. It all makes sense now, he murmurs. They spread the process and divided it like a chain reaction itself. Bagge, watching him, shakes his head slowly. You sound almost admiring. Heisenberg pauses, pencil hovering over the paper. I am, he says. Not of the bomb, but of the organization. It was science turned into civilization. The next morning, the BBC announces the bombing of Nagasaki. The news drops like a second detonation inside the walls of Farm Hall. Hahn leaves the breakfast table without a word. Von Weizsäcker mutters something about divine punishment. Heisenberg, expression unreadable, walks to the garden and sits in the damp grass, staring at the horizon. The microphones hidden in the ceiling record his voice again, soft, almost contemplative. They built an empire in silence, an empire of secrecy, industry, and faith. We had the science. They had the system. Inside, the others remain at the table, each man lost in private ruin. For the first time in their lives, they understand what it means to be outthought not in theory, but in logistics and in belief itself. August 10th, 1945. 3 days after Nagasaki Farm Hall has gone quiet. The scientists no longer debate. They sit by windows, read worn copies of Goethe and Kant, or pace the halls with the ghostly stillness of men who have seen their reflection in history's dark glass. The house creaks as if it too is burdened by their thoughts. In the sitting room, Heisenberg stands before the hearth, sketching something in the soot on the stone with the end of a spoon. His voice is distant, almost mechanical. If Oak Ridge handled uranium enrichment, he says, then Hanford must have been the plutonium route. Graphite-moderated reactors, probably several in parallel. And Los Alamos? Yes, that's where the physics happened. Otto Hahn, sunk into a chair with his head in his hands, barely lifts his eyes. You speak of it as if it's a laboratory problem, he murmurs. But it's not. It's the end of the world. Heisenberg doesn't reply immediately. He's thinking of Groves again, of the man who commanded this unseen machine. To build it, he continues, he must have divided everything. Thousands of contractors, each building parts of the bomb without knowing. You can't hide an idea, but you can hide its pieces. Von Weizsäcker, sitting on the piano bench, turns toward him. You're describing bureaucracy as if it's genius. Perhaps it is, Heisenberg answers quietly. In our country, we built castles of theory. They built a machine that obeyed no ideology, only the problem. The remark lands hard. In the corner, Diebner stares into his tea, saying nothing. He had run the German Uranium Club, the military branch of the atomic effort, reporting to generals who never understood the difference between a chain reaction and a chain of command. He remembers those meetings, the confusion, the shortage of materials, the skepticism from above. The Führer wanted miracles, Diebner mutters, but he never believed in the patient kind. Hahn finally looks up, his eyes glassy. They had no Führer, he says. Only a general with a budget and a promise. Heisenberg nods. And scientists who didn't fight their leaders. They served them. He lets out a dry laugh. Imagine that. Outside, the English sky brightens, pale and indifferent. The radio crackles faintly from the next room. Reports from Japan. Photographs of Hiroshima reduced to ash. Eyewitness accounts of glass melted into the pavement, of shadows burned into stone. The words drift into the hallway where Bagge stops to listen. His face drains of color. The others join him. The reporter's voice is calm, clinical. In Hiroshima, he says, the bomb created temperatures exceeding several thousand degrees. The city center has been vaporized. Hahn turns away, shaking. Mein Gott. Heisenberg stands frozen, eyes fixed on the wireless as if he could see through it, past the static, past the words, to the mushroom cloud blooming over a world that used to make sense. He imagines the detonation as an equation realized, E-NAS MC2 not as symbol but as heat, light, and annihilation. Von Weizsäcker says quietly, they must have felt it. The scientists, I mean, at Los Alamos. They must have stood and watched their work destroy a city. They would have justified it, Hahn says, to end the war. Heisenberg turns sharply. Perhaps, but perhaps they also watched with awe, because they had done the impossible. His tone is flat, analytical, but his eyes betray a strange light. Do you understand what it means, Otto? They built laboratories larger than towns, reactors in secret valleys, cities where no map pointed. It is beyond any government, it is. Civilization weaponized, the phrase lingers. Civilization weaponized. The microphones above the chandelier capture the silence that follows. Even the guards posted outside sense that something in the air has changed, that these men, who once defined the boundaries of the atom, now sit beneath the weight of something much larger, a moral gravity they cannot escape. That night, as rain begins again, Han and Heisenberg share a brief conversation by the stairs. Han's voice is trembling. Do you think they will tell the world how they built it? Heisenberg looks down at him, his face caught between admiration and regret. No, he says. The secret was the structure, not the science. The Americans learned how to hide knowledge inside an empire. He pauses, hand on the banister. We thought secrecy was about silence. They proved it was about scale. Hours later, long after the others have gone to bed, Heisenberg sits at the small desk in his room, a single candle burning beside his notebook. His writing is steady now. Equations, diagrams, notes on uranium cascades and neutron reflectors. But in the margin he adds one final line in small, careful script. The bomb was not only built from atoms. It was built from people. He closes the book. The candle guttered. September 1945. Farm Hall, England. The war has officially ended. Japan has surrendered. Across the Atlantic, the American newspapers are filled with photographs of smiling soldiers and the new age of atomic power. But behind the walls of Farm Hall, 10 men live in quiet exile, witnesses to a truth they can neither deny nor forget. The mansion's ivy has begun to brown in the autumn chill. British guards patrol the grounds less often now. The tension has faded into routine, but inside the rooms echo with a strange mixture of envy, guilt, and awe. Otto Hahn sits at a writing desk, drafting a letter he will never send. It is addressed to the Royal Swedish Academy. He apologizes for the discovery that led here, for splitting the atom, for starting something that could not be stopped. He stops halfway through, his pen trembling, and mutters to himself, I only wanted to understand nature. Downstairs, Heisenberg plays chess with von Weizsäcker. The pieces click softly against the board. If the Americans could organize such a thing, Heisenberg says, then the world will follow. Every nation will want its own Manhattan Project. Von Weizsäcker moves his knight, frowning. Then the next war will not need armies, only factories. Heisenberg nods almost absently. And scientists. He looks out the window. The morning fog lies heavy over the garden, the grass silver with dew. For a moment it reminds him of another landscape, the snowy hills of southern Germany, where in 1944 he had drawn diagrams of uranium cubes in a makeshift lab while Allied bombers thundered overhead. He remembers thinking then that science would save them, that reason might outlast ideology. Now he knows better. Later that day, a British officer arrives with a small leather briefcase. Inside are photographs, aerial images of Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Hanford. The men gather around the table as he lays them out one by one. In the black and white prints, they see sprawling grids of buildings, smokestacks, endless rows of identical houses, and fences, always fences. One image shows the Y-12 plant at Oak Ridge, a labyrinth of pipes and turbines stretching into the horizon. Heisenberg stares at it in silence. Von Weizsäcker exhales sharply. So this is what secrecy looks like, he says. It looks like a city. Hahn studies the photo of Hanford, the plutonium site. And all of it built for a single weapon, he says softly. The officer nods. 3 cities in truth, each built in isolation, each unaware of the other's purpose, Diebner whispers, almost to himself. An army of ignorance. Heisenberg folds his arms. No, an army of faith. He turns to the officer. Do they know now? The workers, I mean. Do they know what they built? The officer hesitates. Some do. Most don't want to. The scientists exchange glances. That answer somehow is worse. That night, Heisenberg stands by his bedroom window. The moonlight falls across his open notebook. He has written a new heading across the top. Lessons from the American Project. Below it, he lists 5 lines in his precise, slanted script. Scale conquers secrecy. Organization is a weapon. Belief drives the impossible. Morality lags behind achievement. The future will belong to those who can control both. He stares at the words for a long time, then closes the notebook and slides it under his pillow. Outside, the night is still. The guards smoke by the gatehouse. In the nearby village, a church bell tolls 9 times. The sound drifts across the fields through the open window and into the quiet house where the fathers of fission sit in their captivity, haunted by the magnitude of what they never made, and by those who did. In the years that follow, historians will call the Manhattan Project a triumph of science and secrecy. Politicians will call it victory. The scientists at Farm Hall will call it something else, inevitable. For in that English mansion, they came to understand that the true revolution was not in the atom's heart, but in humanity's will to organize the universe around it. And so, as Heisenberg finally douses the lamp and lies awake in darkness, one final thought passes through his mind, one he will never write down. We were defeated not by the bomb itself, but by the civilization capable of building it. The wind shifts outside, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of rain. The empire of silence endures,